Mark chapter 5. There are two really great puzzles in Mark chapter 5, and from my scraping around on the internet, I haven't found anybody who's given a satisfactory answer to any of them. In fact, everybody declares, I don't know. I'll just say what they are quite quickly at the beginning. The first is the location of the man who's called Legion. It's called the Gerasenes in Mark, in most text. It's called the Gadarenes in Matthew, and by infection some other texts. And then the Gergesenes, or some variation of that, all over the place. But actually all of these have authority of a kind, and they all have, if you like, a historic city to back them up. I had hoped that I would answer that. I'd be able to tell from the story, as it isn't clear from the textual analysis, what the original was, and that would probably send me back to an Old Testament text or something like that. I haven't been able to, but I'll discuss it. So I don't know that. And the other great puzzle, which no one seems to know, is in the second half of the chapter. Jairus' daughter is 12 years old, and the sandwich, or rather the middle bit in this Markian sandwich, is a woman with an issue of blood, and she has had her issue of blood for 12 years. Now clearly there is a connection which would take us to at least one meaning of the passage, and I have lots of thought on that, but I have not been able to solve the puzzle either. On the way there are some other great puzzles and things to ponder, and because I'm so terrible at collecting my thoughts, I'm going to do this bit by bit and just speak in little chunks like this. So, first things first. Gerasenes, Gadarenes, Gergesenes, Gergesites. One of the things I like to do that step scripture tool for every person makes possible is I use the omnibar and just put in the sounds from the consonants and see if I can get a Hebrew word that will seem significant to me. And usually you do. For example, Gadar is all about, sometimes it means a mason, or sometimes it means to build, but particularly it means to fill a hole, or fill a hole in a breach. And as you probably know, that's one of my kind of heuristic interests in this text, that over this kind of eerie lake and under it there's a kind of breach or rupture in the membrane between worlds, or these kind of concentric spheres, and certainly there's a lot about holes, fixing holes, men being lowered through holes, disciples letting down nets and pulling things up, and so on and so forth. Yes, if there were a flow like in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they've got a hell mouth, that there are just certain locations that these kind of evil forces seem to flow out of. I don't think that, but plugging a hole is, I don't know, it's a possibility. I don't know. It's interesting. Gurg gave me nothing. Gurg. Gurgush. I took off the g just to see what that would do, and got rugush, which gives us something to do with throng, both as as a verb and a noun, and that has lots of a kind of untidy thronging. Thorobos, phlibo, people pressing in on Jesus, and hormizdo, what the pigs do. They kind of rush. It's a crowd rushing in a chaotic way, but it's very tentative. Probably the most useful one was Gerash for Gerasenes. Gerash. Just try changing the vowel in the omnibar. So Garash, Gerash. And as long as the three Hebrew letters are the same, don't worry too much about the vowels, the kind of English vowels in between. And then look at similar words related to. Garash, certainly associated with casting out or driving out and sending into exile. It's got the word, the name Gershon, which has the name Ger, who is a sojourner, and the theme that comes through is one thing, casting out like ekbalo, which is what you do with spirits, and refugees. That comes through really, really strongly. We call them sojourners, but really they are refugees, and people being asked to leave. Jesus being asked to leave, and the spirit, the unclean spirits, asking Jesus, begging Jesus to be allowed to stay in the country. And that also seems significant to me. I looked up Girgashites, I think. Yes, Girgashites. Yes. There's actually a text of them. I mean, clearly all of these are places. They're all places. The Girgashites are definitely around this area. And there's actually a text with Joshua in the book of Joshua, book 3. And he's driving them out. They're one of the peoples, the unclean peoples, who he will drive out. It's interesting. It's a heuristic. Make of it what you will. But for me, the idea about exclusion, refugees, was kind of jumped out at me. I should just say, in a nod to the historicist, that all of these places exist or existed, and there are modern places that lay claim to be Girgash or whatever. I think it's Gerasa and Gadara. And some of them are rather splendid Greco-Roman cities. I mean, they really are Greco-Roman on the east side of that lake. I mean, it does seem appropriate that if you were hosting a massive Roman army, you would want a Greco-Roman city producing pork on an industrial scale. So, I mean, sure, it makes sense there would be a massive pork farm there. As I say, I don't pay too much attention to the history, and all of these places, none of them are actually on the lake. And one thing that's very clear is that Jesus goes east or Peran, to the other side, and he never goes very far inland. So all of the places we're talking about are right adjoining the sea, and in fact the pigs will go rushing off a cliff and into the sea. So, there's that to bear in mind. You know what, I'll stop there. I want to just say some words about the ecology of evil spirits. I mean, I've always wondered, and the Gospels give you very little help with this, what happens to an evil spirit after it's cast out? I mean, if an evil spirit simply enters another person, then in terms of the great scheme of things, you're not doing so much good. You're really moving the shit around. Apart from the fact that the ability to cast out these evil spirits is a sign of Jesus' authority. And a lot of Christians would say, that's the point of all these healings and exorcisms above all. But I do wonder just about the ecology of evil. I mean, where does it go? And even these days, when people don't think in terms of evil spirits, there is still very much an ecology of evil. And some people seem to carry it and pay for it, and other people seem to be doing most of it and living very comfortable and respectable lives. And that's definitely the case here. But I'm asking about, the first thing I would say is that Mark never distinguishes very clearly between the person who is possessed and the demons. Kradzo is what demons do. It's also a man crying out in pain. Our name is Legion. Sorry, yes. At the end, the demons ask not to be sent out of the country. They're not appealing to Jesus not to expel them from the man, but they don't want to be sent out of the country. Well, where exactly was Jesus sending them? Okay, when you send them into the pigs, fine if they live in the pigs, and certainly the idea of animals being possessed is a very strong one. Lots of words in the Old Testament mean evil spirit and actually refer to an animal, like seer is really a possessed goat. And definitely these things happen. But when you send them out into the pigs and then the pigs instantly jump into the water and drown themselves, what happens to the evil spirits? Presumably the evil spirits don't perish with the pigs. I did think maybe they go into the water. That's one answer. If because of the position of this story, actually the previous story was about the Lilaps, the whirlwind. If that was following this, it would definitely make sense that Jesus basically cast all of those evil spirits after they killed the pigs into the sea, and they cause tempests when he's sleeping, when he's not in a position to control them. And certainly people experience the sea as having these horrifying moods, just like these possessed animals. Another possibility, and one which I think a lot of Christians indulge, is that when Jesus heals and takes pollution, or when he expels an unclean spirit, he takes that uncleanness or pollution into himself. And so, that saying from Isaiah, he suffered for our iniquities, or he suffered our iniquities or our afflictions. And that all of these things which Jesus contains perish on the cross. The whirlwind was interesting. It could be that when Jesus is sleeping, he loses consciousness, and all of the evil spirits which he's mastered and from which he's freed suffering people and he's containing inside his own body, when he sleeps, they go a bit nuts and stir up the sea. And then as soon as he wakes up, he can command them again. I mean, that's a very kind of wizardy version of Jesus, but you know, there's there's something to it. I mean, I actually think of the sea and the sky above it as a kind of portal, if you like. Perhaps the spirits go down to hell, but they remain in the same place. They remain in the same location, just in a lower circle or something like that. I mean, other people, modern scholars, have written about the refugee, and there is definitely something. In some ways, the possessed man can be seen as a type of Jesus, because he's possessed by all of these spirits. I mean, there's clearly the whole city. There are 2,000 pigs. It could be that the whole city are Kittim. They're Romans, they're invaders, they're people who are by their definition are polluted. And it's almost as though the man himself takes all of the evil from the town all upon himself. He himself, of course, presumably is expelled, and he's living among the tombs. It doesn't actually say he's outcast. I think it is implied. He lives among the tombs, and he's cutting himself with stones, and he can't be bound. Why they would try to bind him? I mean, perhaps one would assume they would be afraid of him, and they certainly don't want him coming into the town. But it's almost as though he's serving a function for the society, that he, a little bit like they used to have this thing, a sin eater, someone who kind of ate your sin and took it away from you. And of course, this would always be a poor and desperate person who had no other means of support. Yeah, he's excluded. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran up and fell down before him. This is always true with the evil spirits. You would think they would run away from Jesus, but they always run right to him. They seem to be this kind of magnetic flow towards Jesus. And crying out with a great voice. You know, it is interesting that this is used in one of the Passions, I think in Mark. Cradso, the only time Jesus uses this, cry out, and phone megale, with a loud voice. Yes, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? And this is odd. I adjure you by God. I mean, we haven't seen Jesus using the word horkisto, but exorcists do use that word. I adjure you to bind you with an oath by God. And here it's the spirits who attempt to bind Jesus with an oath, that you do not torment me. Because he was saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Now then, I'm told that in exorcisms it is common to ask your name, but in Mark I can only say that Jesus doesn't ask their names. This is the only time he ever asks the demon's name. In fact, it may be the only time he's ever got into a conversation with a demon. What is your name? And he said to him, Legion onoma moi, Legion is my name, hoti polloi esmen, because we are many. Yes, Legion is my name. Legion, of course, also links us to Romans, as do the pigs, and as with the historical references. It definitely feels that way. Yeah, I mean, I once indulged the possibility that this was a kind of Jewish Christian mock on those who brought Christianity to the Gentiles, and particularly the Romans, that casting the spirit into pigs, which you're not supposed to do. Yes, this word parakaleo pola, to beg earnestly. Yes, and this is such an odd sentence at Mark 5:10. Kai parakaleuton, and he, the man, begs him, Jesus, many times, in order that me auta apostele, that he might not send them out of the country. It's almost as though the man is entreating or mediating between the spirits and Jesus, or the spirits and society. Yes, out of the country. I mean, the country doesn't normally include water. This area or this region, that makes sense. It doesn't normally include region. I mean, Jesus anyway agrees to their wish. There was a great herd of pigs feeding. Prostoi ore, on the hillside. Yes, we got this mountain. Basically, mountains are considered sometimes wild places when they're used generically. Wild places and tombs. And they entreated him, saying, "Send us into the pigs, in order that we might go into them." Yes, I'm intrigued. What happens to them? What happens to them? Are they happy to drown, or? Yeah, okay. And he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits went out, entered the pigs, and hormersen. Yes, stampede. Yes, this seems to be a key word in this chapter. A kind of unruly crowd rushing down a Kremnu, down a steep bank into the sea. I've often found a couple of other places in the Gospels. One of the things I entertain is that Jesus is finally killed by a community, obviously not by crucifixion, but to throw someone down a hill. I think people always talk about stoning, but I think perhaps this is another way, or perhaps a more common way, because it involves less agency, just pushing somebody down a hill when a whole community does it. Nobody feels touched by blood guilt, and there's no murder, so to speak. Yes, but I do wonder about that. Down a cliff. There were about 2,000, and epnigonto. Yes, they drowned in the sea, or they were throttled, or they choked. Yes, it's odd that. I'm not sure if there's a better word for drowned, but anyway, Mark chooses not to use it. They're throttled. It involves being silenced, and losing a voice as well. Yeah, okay. And those who were herding them fled. Apangelo is interesting in this chapter. Yes, they announced it in the city and the fields, and they said what had happened. And then they, the people who heard this, came to Jesus, and they see the man who was, for me, this is the eeriest line of the whole chapter. It's very effective. And they see the man who had a demon sitting, clothed, presumably he was naked before, and in his right mind. That the tranquility of this man, the calmness, a lot like in the previous chapter we saw Lilaps and Galene. We saw this whirlwind and then this eerie calm. They're linked by the same word, megale, a great storm and then a great calm. It's eerie. Of he who had the legion, and they were afraid. Yes. And those who saw it described what happened. Yeah, yeah. Yes, this is one of the eeriest parts. And they began to beg him to go out of the region, Horion. Yes, to go out of the area. I think it's the only time we've seen that happen. I mean, people contest Jesus, or they flock to Jesus, but no one's ever asked him. Just ask him to leave. We want you to go away. It could be, I mean, you would think that they might be grateful that he'd healed their poor guy, but I don't think so. I don't think that is how people feel at all. I mean, one way of seeing it is that the spirits themselves are refugees. They've been driven out. It's possible they've been driven out by Jesus before. And they found a safe place and they just want to stay. All the refugees really want is to be allowed to stay and not to be harried. And these people, yes, they're interested in moving people on. They want to move Jesus on. I wonder how they feel about the man who was cured. They seem concerned. Right. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who'd been possessed begged again, parakale, that he might be with him. So essentially, this is what I would want. If somebody cast out that many demons after so many years, I would want to stay close to him. And Jesus didn't permit him. Some people have called this guy the first apostle, because on the one hand he's similar to Jesus in that he appears to be containing all of these demons, which properly belong to the whole society, just in himself. And here he becomes an apostle. Go to your home and your people and tell them, apangelo, how much the Lord has done and had mercy. And here it actually mentions the Decapolis. Yeah, and apangelo becomes kerosein, which often means preach. And he began to preach in the Decapolis about everything Jesus had done. I do wonder, Ethel as I said, in Mark, this is the first time, I think the only time Thaumazdo occurs. Let's just have a look here. With step, this is really easy. Yeah, Marvel Thaumazdo. No, it's 5 times in this book. 5 times in Mark, 45 times in the New Testament. It's the most common word for marvel or wonder. I think this is certainly the first time, and I think the other times may also be from the end of the Gospel of Mark, which I don't consider to be the same text. Okay, stop there. Okay, part 2. Let me try to finish this. I'm struggling to collect my thoughts, and like I say, I don't have any answers to the big questions, but I hope I can spread some light. So, when Jesus had crossed in the boat to the other side, so we're in a new location, it's tempting to see a connection with the first half of chapter 5, but I don't think you have to. But anyway, I'm going to. In a way, the man with demons was a vicarious sufferer, that he suffered. He took the demons of the whole community, as it were, from which he was excluded. I think that's why they never tossed him off the cliff, which must have been tempting. It looks like they'd attempted to chain him, presumably not for his own benefit. But I don't know, maybe that was implied. So I suppose I'm exploring the idea of vicarious pollution and of a kind of ecology of evil. There's a kind of ecology between the man who was possessed and the rest of the community. And I'm suggesting that there's a connection, obviously in the sandwich, between Jairus' daughter and the woman with the discharge. And that also is to do with the ecology of misery or of pollution. Consider the two of them. Jairus is leader of the synagogue. His name means light, perhaps God is light, I don't know. He's leader of the synagogue, so I'm guessing that he's probably the most respectable person in the community. And his little daughter is at the point of death. The word is thugatrion. The words for her are thugatrion, either paidion or paidarion, and choration. So little daughter, little child, little girl, all of which are neuter and diminutive. Yes, and again there's this great crowd and this throng, this oplos polus, and thlibo, this thronging around him. Yes. Okay, the woman with the discharge of blood, I'll come back here. Gosh. Okay, one thing you might want to think about is the girl is 12 years old, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is connected with her first period and becoming a woman. That's why I flagged up those nouns which are all neuter, which is often used for children. But I think she's just entering the stage of her life where she becomes gendered. She becomes a woman. So a girl's first period and a woman who has had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And the girl is 12 years old. I just come back to mark5, 25. I know I said this before, but I really like the way the participles, these normative participles, line up and tell the whole story of the last 12 years and recently and now. A woman being with a discharge of blood for 12 years, pathusa, she'd suffered many things from many doctors, and dapanesasa, she spent everything she had, admeden ophalethesa, and she's nothing benefited, but rather elthusa eistokeron, rather she's gotten worse. And more recently, akusasa, having heard about Jesus, she's come, elthusa, in the crowd, standing behind him, or pissed them, hepsato, hapto, she touched his garment. That tells us this whole story. Unlike Jairus, who's the most respected person in his community, she would be an outcast. She's not, because she's ritually impure, she shouldn't really be in the city at all. And by milling around in the crowd, she's already committing a violation. She's polluting all the people she's touching, and we know from what the disciples say that everybody's touching. And she touches Jesus, so she, by doing this, she pollutes him. One of the texts, at least, has lathrai, which means in secret. She knows that she's not meant to be doing this. There's something covert or clandestine about what she's doing, and she is very well aware of this. And in that way also, she's a little bit like Jesus, who sometimes describes himself as something like a spy, and is keeping himself secret. I can't find lathrai offhand. Yes, so she knows she's not meant to be there. She's polluting everybody by being there, and she's polluting Jesus particularly by touching him. Actually, if you look up hapto in step with your Septuagint enabled, you'll get to Leviticus and you'll find the instructions for what you do if you touch somebody unknowingly and then later you realise, which is exactly what we have here, hapto, and then Jesus ginosko, he realised. And actually you're required to sacrifice a lamb, which is interesting because we have a lamb who appears to be dead in the other part of the story. The lamb is Korasion, but in the Hebrew, Talitha, little lamb, literally. So I do wonder if that's behind it. I do wonder if it's something to do with menstruation, is what links the two stories. The word thugater certainly links the two stories. Yes. One thing. Okay, here's this line. And she said, "If I touch even his garments, I'll be made well." Yeah. And immediately, exeranthe, the flow of her blood, and he knew, egno, Jesus, in his body. No. She knew in her body that she was healed from her affliction. And immediately Jesus, epignous, knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, he turns around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" Which is ludicrous to the disciples. You see the crowd, sunt libontase, pressing around you, and you say, "Who touched me?" Everybody touched you. Yeah. And he looked around to see who did it. Yes. It's almost like it's almost like the last 12 years have been leading up to this moment when she touched. That's what that string of participles tells me. And here she has agency. El then prosepesen apen. She came and she fell at his feet and she said to him the whole truth. But she's forbear thesa and tremusa. She's fearing and trembling. Yes, and Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healthy from your affliction." And right at this moment, 5:35, someone comes from the ruler's house who says, "Your daughter is dead." I guess what I want to say is, gosh, there's an invisible thread between the house of Jairus and his daughter and this woman. She's been excluded from the community. She won't have been able to have a husband, or if she did have a husband, he would have been able to divorce her, which is one of the words that Gerash, one of the things that Gerash means. So she might have been divorced, and she hasn't been able to have a child. And so this great sadness that comes from her arises from that. And in the meantime, this ruler of the synagogue has been living and ruling in the community and having all the good things that come from respectability and the pleasures that come from parenthood. And this has been going on for the same period of time, 12 years. And at one moment, the moment in which the woman touches Jesus, at that same moment, as it were, the girl dies. And from this point, Jairus feels the sorrow of being a child, of losing a child. But actually, it's the sorrow that the woman has been carrying for 12 years. That's why I say there's an invisible thread between the two. Why trouble the teacher any further? And Jesus said, "Do not fear, only believe." I mean, belief is clearly important here. Okay. And he did not allow anyone to follow with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. I like to think, I sometimes visualize these gospel texts. And I visualize this. We have a bed with the little girl or the lamb lying. It's rectangular, and we have Jesus at her feet, James and John on either side, Peter, I guess, at the top, and the parents of the girl on either side of Jesus. And it's the same shape that we get at the cross. It's just an observation. I've seen this shape before, and I'll flag it up when I tell you when I see it again. Okay, so Jesus came to the house of the Archosynagogos, and again Thorubos, this commotion, and Kleontas, people weeping, and Alasdontes, Pola, wailing loudly. And when he entered, he said, "Why are you making commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but is sleeping." Yes, and this is interesting. 540. Autos de ekbalon pantas. Okay, in this weird chapter, which is all about casting out demons and probably Gerasha, and driving out, or refugees, or a man who was driven out, a woman who's been driven out of her community. But the only time we see ekbalo in this chapter is here, when Jesus throws out all of the other people. And he took the father of Ispaidion, of the child, and his mother and those with him, and he went to where the child was, Paidion. Yes. And taking her by the hand, we've seen that before, or taking the hand of the child, he says to her, Talitha cum, which interpreted means, little lamb or little girl, I say to you, arise. Incidentally, the Hebrew or Aramaic cum definitely means stand. In the Greek, I can make it mean wake up. Also is good. And it appears to be both. I should say that all of these scenes, arguably all of the scenes in the Gospel, some people think of them as occurring on a kind of a different sphere, and I'm inclined to agree with that. That when we see somebody being saved, they're also being redeemed on a different level. And immediately the girl got up, Anastair, and started walking around. This is it. For she was 12 years old. You know, why for? She was 12 years old. And they were immediately overcome with the greatest astonishment. Yeah, she was 12 years old. And this is interesting. Remember at the end of the last scene, after he healed the man who was possessed by a legion, and he sent him out to Decapolis to tell everyone about it. And for this one, he tells them that no one should know this. Give her something to eat. So he wants to keep this a secret. And that's another puzzle which will be familiar to you from almost every chapter of Mark. It appears to be pointing in two directions at once. On the one hand, he's saying, be secret, and telling people he's healed not to disclose it, particularly where there was pollution involved. And on the other hand, he's saying you need to put your lamp on a lampstand and everything's to be declared. It's actually working out why in each case is something that no one has managed to do. So, have I managed to solve the riddle of what the connection is between 12 years? There's definitely something about menstruation. One would think that the woman would be happy. I mean, it's entirely possible that she's at menopause age, and that she is also that both women are going through a change. The young girl is becoming a woman and having her first period, and the other woman is having the menopause, which must be a great relief, because it signals an end to her impurity and her exclusion. That's possible. It's possible there's something to do with Leviticus and particularly this kind of pollution and sacrificing a lamb. Ah, gosh. Yes, the invisible thread. The invisible thread. It's almost as though for 2 minutes Jairus and his wife experience what the woman has experienced for 12 years. I find this is an absolutely wonderful chapter. Whatever you think, whatever your position in Christianity or outside it is, it's one of the most compelling. And actually, I find the woman with the discharge of blood one of the most moving people in the Gospels. You know what? I'm sure I'm going to think of something else that I forgot to say, but I'm going to stop now.